The Teal Mask DLC brought some great new Pokemon to the fold: Okidogi, Munkidori, Ogerpon, Ursa the Blood Moon among them. It brought back some old favorites like Clefable and Gliscor, which in Draft League wasn't as problematic. Let's take a quick retrospective on what Teal Mask brought to the Draft League format as we go into Indigo Disc and see, was this DLC a success for the format? Did we get a lot of interesting new toys? Did it change the metagame in any significant way? And if so, what are some good things about this that we can take forward into our next Draft Leagues? If you guys are excited for this video, make sure to leave a like and subscribe to the channel. On my way to 400 by the end of the year, would really appreciate it if you could help me get there. The DLC storyline introduced 4 main Pokemon: Ogerpon with a variety of different forms, and Toxic Chain Pokemon with the ability that it can Toxic on contact 30% of the time, and Okidogi, Munkidori, and Fezandipiti. Okidogi was one of the Pokemon I personally had a chance to use in the BBR Scramble Draft Tournament, where I got to use it with Terra to great effect as not only just a very physically powerful breaker, something in terms of a role of a Conkeldurr would accomplish, but also as a way to use Terra to set up defensively neutral typing to set up for bulk up sweeps as well. This Pokemon I think was a phenomenal addition to the metagame, and adding in these kind of slower, very physical balanced attackers I think create for good gameplay. It moves us from those high speed top tier threats that we see usually providing really centralized and difficult prep to this Pokemon like Okidogi, allowing for a lot of really effective counterplay even through Terra. Fezandipiti was also a Pokemon that got to thrive in a metagame where defensive Pokemon are not really at the top of the food chain. U-Turn and Toxic Chain, this Pokemon was a great user of that ability, the ability to defensively come in, take some hits, and then U-Turn out off common checks that would come in and toxic them, allows it to use that defensive role very effectively while also gaining momentum. In my battle against JV you're seeing on screen, he got 3 Toxic Chains off in one game, and that really opened up a lot of big calcs for him, showing the viability of having a really solid defensive Pokemon with the ability to toxic while keeping momentum. Munkidori was kind of a Pokemon caught in the middle though, and if we have to look at the worst one of the 3 and not necessarily a success at its price point, Munkidori at 106 speed, and while 130 special attack is very powerful, put it into a speed tier that didn't really suit it too well, and you saw it on a lot of opportunities. It wasn't really able to make a lot of progress or force a lot of Pokemon out with that U-turn in the same way that Fezandipiti is able to use its defensive power to pressure those Pokemon out. So I would say a Pokemon that still has a little bit, to figuring out to do, and I think if we bring its price point down, we'll see teams that have a better opportunity to actually leverage the abilities that this Pokemon has. Unfortunately for Ogerpon, this Pokemon did not really have the same impact on draft that I think a lot of people were expecting. With a lot of the leagues trending towards low tier Terra, Ogerpon Fire especially had a real difficult opportunity actually being effective. With Stealth Rocks and Hazards being really prevalent in the metagame right now, is considering how offensive it is, being 25% weak to Rock and being forced to take that every time, and with Hornleech being a really easy move to switch in on for a lot of team compositions, that Pokemon really did not have a good chance of making, a big headways into Draft League as it came out. Ogerpon Water, a little bit better. Obviously the typing is, pretty decent, but it's competing with a lot of water types in that range, and the grass type can be a little bit difficult from a defensive perspective, with poison and hurricanes being, and flying types being very prevalent, especially in low tier Terra metagames. These Pokemon were absolute hits in VGC though, not hindered in the same way in Draft League where you can't run heavy duty boots or Terra and low Terra leagues. These Pokemon thrived in the VGC metagame. You saw a lot of high usage out of the water and fire Ogerpon specifically, so definitely a hit there while not hitting the mark in Draft League. Before we get into the biggest Pokemon to come out of the DLC, let's take a look at what came back and the impact that had. Clefable coming back I think was the biggest addition, I think in aggregate, of all of the Pokemon that came in this DLC, besides maybe the last one, and that's primarily due to the fact that this tier list is not good when it comes to fairy types. We have been crying out for more defensive fairy type options in this metagame, and we got probably the best one not on the board in Clefable. Clefable as not just a defensive Pokemon, as a setup sweeper, as a win condition, the ability to play really defensively and then pivot as an offensive win con. It's just such a great Pokemon to have in the metagame. I know I'm biased because I love Clefable, but I think this tier list really needed defensive fairies, and we got the best one back, which was super crucial. We also got Gliscor back, and while it was banned in OU for a lot of different reasons, in Draft League it was one of the best Pokemon we could have gotten back. We've been crying out for more defensive options in Draft League to counterplay some of the big new threats that the Paldea Dex has brought, and Gliscor is a great way to do that. Now, while unlike OU, you're not going to be tearing this Pokemon often, as you're usually going to either have a low-tier Terra metagame or going to be tearing a big offensive threat, such as the Volcarona, for example, it still has a lot of ways to come in defensively and check a lot of big threats. One of the changes that I think was really crucial and kind of matches how this metagame is going is the fact that it got Spikes and lost Roost. Having your defensive Pokemon actually get, hazards up is going to be very important, and we're going to be talking about another Pokemon next week that's going to fit a similar role. This is a great addition, I think, to the metagame, and while it really hurt OU, I think it's been a great Pokemon to have back in Draft League as we continue to build out the decks with more defensive options. The two moves that came back that I want to talk about are Knockoff and Scald. Now, I'm a really big believer that Knockoff is a problematic move in Pokemon as we move into these newer generations. In ORAS and USIM, it was a little bit more manageable due to the fact that Megas and Z moves give you really easy ways to counterplay Knockoff and give you reliable switch-ins and make Knockoff not as free of a move as it is nowadays. Nowadays, especially with their current offensive metagame and the fact that hazards are really prevalent, Boots now becomes not a good way to counterplay hazards on your defensive Pokemon, as Knockoff is a move that can be clicked without any repercussion. I think overall probably people are still going to view this as a benefit, and I might do a video in the future talking about the detriment that Knockoff brings to the metagame, but overall I think this was probably not a great addition back, and I think the metagame was better off for it not being there. The other move coming back is Scald, and I mean, if you look, I actually think Scald was a great addition to come back, which usually you would hear the other way around. And the reason I think Scald is important, if you look about counterplay to physical Terra types, one of the great things about Terra in this generation in terms of enabling setup sweepers is the factor to create neutral and resistant typings against common defensive Pokemon, allowing them to become setup fodder. Plenty of times when I've used Terra Gyarados, and not just GPU and also in the Smogon tours that I played, is that setting up on Pokemon becomes so much easier when you can change the typing to match the defensive Pokemon you want to take advantage of. For example, Rotom is a great way to check Gyarados in a normal metagame. The electric type attacks make it basically impossible for Gyarados to set up on that Pokemon without a Wacom Berry, and even then you've got to have it chipped basically the entire way through, otherwise you're not killing it. Terra allows you to create a neutral typing and then use combination of moves like Dragon Dance and Rest with Chesto Berry to essentially walk through any Rotom setup, whether it's Heat or whether it is Rotom Wash. That is kind of where Scald comes in, for other Pokemon, not Rotom Wash specifically, but Scald allows you to punish those scenarios where Pokemon try to create neutral typings and set up against you. Scald gives you that additional counterplay which didn't exist before, and that's one of the things I try to harp on in these type of situations when advocating for certain things in a metagame, is a counterplay exists in all scenarios, and it feels like you aren't punished for knowing what the default play a person can make is and not being able to play around it in the builder or in the game. The most powerful Pokemon that they added to the metagame was Ursaluna Blood Moon, a new take on a Pokemon that was just brought into the home metagame, and man, is this ever a powerful Pokemon. The new Blood Moon move, as well as the ability to be a Calm Minesweeper, giving it a little bit of a different dimension to current Ursaluna, this Pokemon was a massive threat, and I think realistically, in terms of how threats are designed, I actually really like this Pokemon, and the main reason I like it is that it doesn't dominate games in the same way and gives you a little bit more interesting counterplay. So as a little bit of a slower Mon, a lot of the times it's going to just end up being a bulky attacker. We talked about one of the positives of Okidogi, and it's not a takeover fast, sweeper, is that, it's a little bit slower, there's a little bit more counterplay, and even the setups, because of that, it makes it a little bit more difficult to set up on. I think this Pokemon was an overwhelming success, and when you look at how it plays, it's kind of a trade for two kind of Mon, and that's a really good way to price Pokemon and have Pokemon come into metagames, where they're not there. It's like, this Pokemon will eventually get momentum and eventually take 3 or 4 off your team. This Pokemon, and a lot of the ways that you can build in and around it, basically it trades for max 2, unless it really dominates in sweeps games. So I think overall, a really positive addition in the metagame, and is one of those team building challenges that I think make a lot of sense to have in Draft League. And there you have it. Those were a few of my highlights from the DLC when it comes to Draft League. Let me know in the comments down below what Pokemon that you really enjoyed that was added in this DLC, and what Pokemon you're most excited for in the new DLC. There's a lot that I'm super excited for, and you're going to see a lot of videos on my channel about that in the next coming weeks. That's all I have for today. Make sure to like and subscribe to the channel if you have not already. I will see you in the next video, and as always, have a wonderful day.